Hello, welcome, it's Dr. Drredfrizzle here, and today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about variation classification. Right, okay, well, I've sort of laid out the structure of this lesson slightly differently from our previous ones, because what I've done is I've wrote you out a list of things, because what I find with these videos is I struggle to, for one thing, remember everything I need to talk about, and for the second thing, I struggle to I struggled to actually get the video to pick up the words that I wrote, so I wrote them a bit bigger this time. You still might not be able to see them. What I may consider doing is like writing in Sharpie or something in the future, but anyway. Right, for now I'm just going to discuss to you about variation classification from this sheet here. Right, okay, so first of all, species is our top category. It would be really hard, like supposing all the animals in the world were part of one group, it would be very hard to actually name them all separately. So what we do is we have this idea of species. Now species are particular groups, and how we group things together is we have a look at the traits or the characteristics or features that they actually have, and then what we do from that is we decide which particular groups like animals can go into. Examples of species include things like us, which are humans, animals such as dogs, pheasants, which is a type of bird, robins. There's just thousands and thousands of species. But basically what you need to know is that species are essentially things that are classified into particular groups. And the other thing you need to know is that species, they can't breed like between species. So supposing you had like a tiger and a lion, because they're separate species, they can't breed to produce offspring. Now, I've briefly discussed with you sexual reproduction in one of my previous videos. What I'd like to say about that is I'd like to say that what happens is fertilisation cannot happen between species, and each parent possesses half the genetic information that's passed on to the children. So supposing you had a female lion and a male lion, and they bred together, which is bisexual reproduction, then you'd get a baby lion with half the traits from the mother and half the traits from the father. Now, there's a few different ways of classifying traits. I'm moving on to this bit here. There's continuous variation and discontinuous variation. Now, continuous variation is essentially differences between animals that can be within a species or can be like in between. Well, not in between, but like across different species. And what continuous means is it's a number that doesn't have to stop. So, for example, you could say the length of your leg, for example, it could be 32.17938 inches long or something, and the number can continue on and on forever if you know it in enough detail. Discontinuous is things like eye colour, and the particular types of things, like you could have straight hair or curly hair, and these are discontinuous, otherwise known as discrete variables. And what this means is that they have to fit in a particular category. So you could have like eye colour, hair colour, hairstyle. That they have to be put into particular groups. Continuous can be like shoe size. Well, no, shoe size is actually discontinuous because you only have a particular number. You can't have like 5.156 of a shoe size. You have to have a whole number shoe size. Whereas continuous can be anything like tree height, for example. And we use these variables to discuss the differences between animals, which can be in one species or between multiple species. So I just want to sort of familiarise yourself with those key terms. Over here we have inherited versus environmental. So basically this means is the genetic information or characteristics or like features of the offspring, are they inherited from the parent, or do they develop them over time? If they develop them over time, like based on their experiences or where they go, that's known as environmental. So supposing somebody had to like hunt and like catch their dinner, that they'd develop large muscles and stuff because they'd be chasing after their dinner. And basically, like in modern life, we don't have to do that much because we obviously have supermarkets and stuff. But the environmental importance means that a process known as natural selection takes place, which is essentially survival of the fittest. Like in this day and age, you could say the survival of anyone who can reproduce is the fittest. So the environment will only allow specific people to survive to reproduce, because like supposing somebody couldn't reproduce because their sperm weren't working properly, or their egg cells weren't working properly, that would mean that they would die out. So this leads to the process of natural selection, which is where the particular individuals that survive are the strongest and the fittest, and survive to pass on their genetic information or instructions onto their children, who develop in the same way or a similar way to them. It's quite a complicated idea, so I just want you to have a moment to think about that before I carry on talking. Right, okay, and the next thing I'd like to talk about is variety. Now, variety comes back from this genetic variation, from the differences in codes for different people, which is called DNA. So like one person might be very tall, another person might be very short, one person might have blue eyes, another person might have green eyes. So again, it links into continuous, discontinuous, because green eyes and blue eyes fit into particular categories, so they're discontinuous, whereas like height and things like that are continuous, because they can have as many decimal points as whatever. Classify. So why do we classify things? Well, I've discussed it in a bit of detail with species. We classify basically because there's too many animals to not classify, because if we named them all, things would get really confusing and we wouldn't know what we're talking about. Suppose if somebody said there's a gorilla, or an ape, and you had millions of different words for different types of monkeys and different types of gorillas, we just get confused. But supposing you use the general term monkey to sum up a group of animals that are all very similar, they're easier to recognise, essentially. There's 5 kingdoms. There's one kingdom that's known as Protoctista. That's quite a hard word to say, but basically all that means is that's a particular type of organism that doesn't fit into any of the other kingdoms. The other 4 include plants, animals, which I've discussed quite a lot before, so I'm not going to write them down for you. And you also have things like bacteria and fungi. Now fungi are like toadstools and mushrooms. I forgot to mention that in my last video actually. And then you have bacteria, which are a particular type of cell that I discussed again in my last video. So that is pretty much it for variation classification. The other point I'd like to add to this video, because I forgot to mention it, is that relates to the human body a bit, is that water and fibre help flush through your digestive system. I didn't mention that in one of my previous videos that I meant to mention that in, so you need to know that is the case. So you know, fibre, fruit and veg, we don't contain the enzymes to digest it, so we can't break it down essentially into its products, which means that it's just used to flush through our system. Okay, so thanks for listening. Goodbye.